Derek's voice cracked on the word. Friday. I felt 34 years of sawdust and silence settle in my chest. But I didn't know then that the crack in my father's plane would soon be the only thing holding me together. I never told Sarah what her mother really said. She called me dreamer who never did, yet I shaped oak. That crack would shatter the lie that it was too late. But to understand how I ended up here, you need to go back to the moment I lost my job. Which was 3 months earlier, on a Thursday morning in late September. I remember the light that morning. It came through the dusty windows of the shop in slanted beams, full of floating particles of sawdust that turned gold in the sun. The smell of old wood and fresh sawdust was so strong it was almost a taste, bitter and sweet, like the sap of a freshly cut plank. The radio was playing that same station it always played, some old rock song I'd heard 1,000 times. Derek's mug was on the bench, chipped, the words, "World's Best Dad," faded to almost nothing. I'd often wondered why he kept it. Maybe it was a joke. Maybe it was a wish. I never asked. Derek called me into the back room. The floorboards creaked under my boots. The back room was small, cluttered with offcuts and a filing cabinet with a drawer that always stuck. He didn't sit me down. He just stood there, holding the phone like it was a dead bird, and said the order we'd been waiting on had been cancelled. The client had gone bust. The bank was calling in his loan. He had to shut the doors by Friday. I remember the way his voice cracked on the word, Friday. He looked older than I'd ever seen him, his face gray, the skin under his eyes sagging. I thought about the 34 years I'd spent at that bench. The thousands of joints I'd cut, the hundreds of pieces of wood I'd shaped. The conversations we'd had over tea, the silences that were just as comfortable. I thought about the way the light fell on the oak in the afternoon, the grain like a river on a map. I said, "Right." He said, "I'm sorry, Frank." I said, "I know." And then I walked out to my bench. My steps were heavy. I could feel the eyes of the other men on me, Jimmy, the apprentice, and old Ted, who'd been there longer than me. They didn't say anything. They didn't have to. I picked up my plane, the one my father had left me, a wooden thing with a handle worn smooth by 2 generations, and I put it in my bag. I didn't look back. I couldn't. If I had, I might have broken down right there. On the bus home, I sat next to a woman who was eating a bag of chips. The vinegar smell filled the whole top deck, sharp, tangy, making my stomach turn. I stared out the window at the Tyne, gray and slow, the water like a slab of slate under a cloudy sky. I thought about my wife, Eileen. She'd been gone 8 years now. Cancer. Quick. The kind that doesn't give you time to say all the things you should have said. I remembered the last time I saw her in the hospital bed, her hands so thin I could feel every bone, her eyes focused on something far away. She used to tell me I was a dreamer. She meant it as a compliment. "You still believe the world can be beautiful," she'd say. "That's rare, Frank. Don't lose it." Her voice was soft, like the rustle of leaves. I nodded, but I didn't believe her. But I had lost it. Somewhere between the funeral and the years that followed, I'd let it slip away. I stopped working on the little sailboat I'd been building in the shed. The shed had become a place of ghosts, Eileen's garden tools still hanging on the wall, her old gardening hat on a hook. I stopped going to the library to borrow books about navigation. I used to love those books, the charts, the diagrams of knots, the stories of men who crossed oceans alone. I stopped dreaming. I just worked. And then I stopped working. So I hid it. That's the part I'm not proud of. I told my daughter Sarah that I'd taken early retirement. She lives in Manchester now, works in marketing, calls me every Sunday. I said the shop was closing and I'd decided to pack it in. She said, "Dad, that's great. You can finally relax." And I said yes, like it was the truth. I could hear the smile in her voice. I could picture her at her desk, with her tidy notebooks and her framed photo of me and Eileen on holiday in Cornwall. I hated myself for lying. But the truth was I got up every morning at the same time, put on my coat, and walked down to the park. The park had a bench by the bowling green, under a sycamore tree. I'd sit there in the same spot, though it cold through my trousers, and watch the old men play their games. They wore flat caps and carried flasks of tea. They took their time, rolling the woods with a gentle precision. The grass was always damp, and the air smelled of wet earth and fallen leaves. Then I'd go to the library and read the newspapers until it was time to go home. The library was warm, with the musty smell of old paper. I'd sit in the same chair, near the window, and pretend to read. I'd tell myself I was looking for a new job, but I wasn't. I was hiding. That went on for 6 weeks. 6 weeks of sitting in the same spot, eating a sandwich I'd made at home, cheese and pickle, the bread getting stale by the end of the week, pretending my life wasn't falling apart. And then, one afternoon, I noticed something in the bottom of my bag. The plane. My father's plane. I'd forgotten it was in there. I pulled it out and held it in my hands. The wood was dark with years of oil and sweat. The blade was dull, nicked, rusted in places. I hadn't used it since I'd left the shop. I ran my thumb along the handle. It felt warm, as if it had been waiting. And that's when I saw it. A crack in the handle. Not a new one, it had been there for decades, I knew that. But I'd never really looked at it. It ran along the grain, almost invisible unless you caught the light just right. I tilted the plane, and the afternoon sun caught the crack. For a long moment I just stared at it. I thought of my father's hands, the way they'd held this same plane, shaping wood in his workshop. The smell of linseed oil. The quiet hum he made when he worked. I thought of the dreams I'd let go, the boat, the sailing, the hope. And then I made a choice. I closed my hand around the handle, stood up, and walked home with a different step. I went straight to the shed. The door was stiff from disuse. I had to push hard. The sailboat was still there, covered in dust, half-built, a skeleton of ribs and stringers. The tarpaulin over it was gray with grime. I pulled it off, and dust motes danced in the light. I put my hand on the bare wood of the keel. It felt cold, but alive. I'd left it when Eileen died. I'd told myself I didn't have the heart to finish it. But the truth was I'd been afraid. Afraid that if I built it, I'd actually have to sail it. And sailing meant leaving. And leaving meant leaving the life I'd shared with her. I remembered her laugh, the way she'd lean against the doorframe and watch me work, saying, "You'll get there, Frank. One day." But now I had my father's plane in my hand, and the crack in the handle held something I couldn't name. I started work that same evening. I cleaned the plane, sharpened the blade on a whetstone until it could shave hair off my arm. The sound of the stone on steel was rhythmic, soothing. I worked by the bare bulb in the shed, the light casting long shadows. I began to shape a new piece of oak for the boat's keel. The wood smelled fresh, resinous. Each curl of shaving that fell from the plane felt like a small victory. Sarah called on Sunday. She said she was coming up to Newcastle for a conference. She wanted to meet me for lunch. I said, "Fine." I didn't tell her about the job or the boat. I told myself I'd figure it out later. But you know what happened. She came to the house on a Wednesday afternoon. The doorbell startled me. I was in the shed, my hands covered in sawdust. I wiped them on my trousers and went to the door. She walked straight past me, into the garden, saw the boat in the shed, and her face did something I'll never forget. It was like watching a window slammed shut. Her eyes went cold. Her jaw tightened. "Dad," she said. "What is this?" "A boat." "I can see that. I thought you were looking for work." "I am." By building a boat? Her voice rose. She stepped closer, her heels clicking on the concrete floor. I put down the plane. Sarah, it's not like that. Then what is it like? You told me you retired. You told me you were fine. And now I find you in the shed, building a toy like a teenager. It's not a toy. It's a sailing dinghy. I started it years ago, before your mother. I know, she snapped. Mum told me. The dream boat. The one you were going to sail to France. And you never did. Because you were always dreaming, Dad, but never doing. That's what she said? That's what I remember. The words hit me like a punch. I felt the air leave my lungs. I wanted to tell her she was wrong. I wanted to tell her about my father, about the plane. But my throat was tight. I just stood there, holding the plane. The handle felt cold in my grip. She left. Said she had to go to her conference. She'd call me later. She didn't. That night, I laid in bed and stared at the ceiling. The streetlight outside cast a pale rectangle on the plaster. I thought about Eileen. Had she really said that? That I was all dream and no do? Maybe she had. Maybe I was. Maybe my father's plane was just a tool, and my desire to finish the boat was just another fantasy. Maybe Sarah was right. I turned over, punched the pillow. The house was silent except for the ticking of the clock in the hall. I thought about the boat, half-built, waiting. I thought about my father's hands on the same plane. I didn't sleep well. But the next morning, I went back to the shed anyway. I had to. I picked up the plane and ran my thumb along the crack. And then I made another choice. I called Sarah. She answered on the third ring. Her voice was guarded. Dad? Sarah, can you come over? There's something I need to tell you. She came that evening. The rain had started again, tapping against the shed roof. I stood by the half-built boat, the plane in my hands. She stood in the doorway, arms crossed. What is it? I took a breath. You're wrong about me. And you're wrong about your grandfather. Her brow furrowed. What do you mean? I looked down at the plane. The day he gave me this, he didn't say much. He never did. But as I was leaving his workshop, he put a hand on my shoulder. I told him I wanted to sail around the world. He said, build your boat, son. Don't wait until it's too late. I was 18. I thought he was just humoring me. I forgot about it for years. But when I found this crack in the handle, I remembered. I remembered his voice. The way his hand felt. He believed in me, Sarah. He always did. I just never saw it until now. She stared at me. The rain drummed on the roof. Then her arms dropped. You never told me that. I never told anyone. Not even your mother. I didn't think it mattered. But it does. It's why I'm building this boat. Not to prove anything to you. To prove it to him. She took a step forward. Her eyes were wet. Dad? She didn't finish. She just came and hugged me. Tight. The way she used to when she was a child. Her hair smelled of shampoo. I felt her breath on my neck. And I felt something in my chest loosen. A knot I'd been carrying since the day Eileen died. It unwound slowly, like a rope slipping free. We sat there in the shed, the rain easing. The bare bulb buzzed overhead. She looked at the boat, at the plane in my hand. I'm sorry, she said. I was harsh. I thought you needed to be practical. I thought dreams were for the young. But Mum told me once, after she got sick, that you were the bravest person she knew. Because you never stopped hoping. And I forgot that. I put my hand on her arm. You didn't forget. You just didn't know. She wiped her eyes. What are you going to do? Finish the boat. And then? I looked at the plane. The crack. The memory of my father's hand. Then I'm going to sail it. She smiled. A real smile. Can I come? I laughed. You get seasick. I'll take a pill. We'll see. That was 2 weeks ago. She called last night and said she'd found a marine restoration course in Southampton. She said she'd pay for it. She said it was time I turned the dream into a reality. I thanked her. But I said no. Your family, and the answer is still no. She was quiet on the phone. Then she said, Why? Because, I said, I need to do this my way. With my hands. With my father's plane. It's not about the money or the course. It's about the moments. The quiet hours in the shed. The slow curve of the wood. The crack in the handle where I found his voice again. I can't buy that. I have to live it. She understood. At least I think she did. There was a long pause, and then she said, Okay, Dad. I get it. So I've been working on the boat every day since. The keel is done. The ribs are in place. I've used my father's plane on every piece. The handle is warm now, from my hands. The crack is still there, but I don't try to hide it. It's part of the story. Sometimes I touch it with my thumb, and I think of him. And this morning, as I was sanding a plank, I noticed something. A little chip of wood had lodged itself in the crack of the plane handle. I picked it out. It was from the oak I'd just shaped. A tiny piece of the boat I'm building. It fit perfectly into the old scar. I held it up to the light. The morning sun caught it, made it glow. And I thought about my father, and how he'd given me a memory that changed everything. And I thought about how I'm leaving a piece of my own work in the same crack, like a message to no one in particular. Or maybe to everyone who comes after. The plane stands on my workbench now, under the bare bulb. It's quiet. It's patient. It's waiting. Tell me about a crack in a tool that changed the way you see the world. If you've held a tool your father gave and felt his hand, hit like. If you see hope in a half-built boat under a bare bulb, subscribe.